after these two technical presentations, here is a presentation more about the global cholera situation in 2023. There have been 24 countries reporting cholera since the beginning of this year, and 15 of them, I think, were in Africa alone. The geographic spread has been increasing a lot since the beginning of the year as well. There have been important dynamics of cross-border transmission, so transmission from one country to another, and there have been several countries affected that had not had any cholera epidemics for many years, like for instance Lebanon or Haiti also. And for all these reasons and for many more, the WHO assesses the global level cholera risk at the moment as being very high. But it's not only the number of cases that are very high and the number of countries affected, but also the mortality is very high in general. We usually measure mortality as CFR, case fatality rate, and in 2021, when we have the last global data, it has been almost 2% worldwide and 3% in Africa. These 3% in Africa is the highest value measured in a decade since 2010. The more recent years, 2022-23, we don't have this global data yet, but as you can see on the table on the right, many countries report very high case fatality rates, and during some of the outbreaks locally, we have even seen very much higher values. As a comparison, an outbreak response is considered, like the minimum standard for outbreak response is considered to have a CFR of below 1%. And you can see that in many of these contexts, we are far away from this value. Let me put the current global cholera situation of it into a historical or context of the last decades. We have been seeing decreasing numbers of countries affected by cholera outbreaks since about 2010. But this year we have 24 countries affected already, but the cholera season, we're only halfway through the year, and the cholera season in some key areas like West Africa hasn't started. So we're not sure if the decrease is going to continue. If we look at cases more in detail, the picture becomes less easy to interpret because we have a very high variability of the number of global cases reported in the different countries. You can see that the overall number of cases is highly impacted by major, very big outbreaks like the one in Haiti starting in 2010, the one in Yemen starting in 2016 with over 2.5 million cases reported so far. This and last year we have been at about 380,000 cases already. So what we can say, even if the final global numbers of these last years have not been published yet, is we're not looking at a decrease for sure. Let's look at mortality globally in the historical context. So globally, we have seen a decrease since I think since the 90s, a downward trend, when we have reached under 1% only during this huge Yemen outbreak that showed huge numbers of cases. And in Africa, we've had a stagnation of the number of the CFR over the last 10 years, with even an increase in the 2021 that, as I said, was the highest value reported since 2010. Now, we have to be quite careful with this data because this is global scale data reported to the WHO, and I think Philip here knows best how difficult it is to get these numbers and that they're not necessarily comparable between countries because we have different surveillance systems and all of that. So, but this is the best we can do to get this historical context. So to conclude this first part of the presentation, I would like to say that it's not yet clearly established if the cholera situation this and last year is very exceptional, but it's not unprecedented, but there is high case numbers and high numbers of countries affected, and it is very concerning. About mortality, mortality has been and still is much higher than we would want it to be. It's unacceptably high, and that especially in Africa. And the outbreak response tools over the last years have evolved, so since the establishment of the vaccine stockpile, the global vaccine stockpile as well. But we still see very, very large disruptive outbreaks in many countries. In this second part, I would like to go a bit more into contributing factors that contribute to these epidemics. There is, of course, many concurrent explanations that have been mentioned over the last month and years. So people talk about COVID fatigue, vaccine hesitancy because of the COVID context, funding gaps, lack of coordination between different actors, health systems that have lost skills because cholera has not been present in the places for a while, lack of long-term water and sanitation improvement, insufficient availability of vaccines, weather events, climate change, and also surveillance systems that have evolved. So let me go through a couple of examples of some of the worst outbreaks we have seen over the last year to kind of show you a little bit how these different factors play together. In Haiti, especially in the area of Port-au-Prince, the capital, we have very high population densities, and gang violence has increased a lot over the last years. There's a lot of social unrest, and there is limited access to water and sanitation. Last fall, there were fuel shortages that even decreased this access, deteriorated the access to water and sanitation, and decreased the mobility of the population and the access to care, which led to the return of cholera after absence for several years. Syria and Lebanon, so we have had no cholera for many years in both of these countries. Syria has been in conflict for the last 10 years, more or less. There has been a lot of displacement, economic crisis, specifically in Lebanon this year, undermining the health system and the infrastructure. And we had an outbreak that started in Syria in 2021, spread to Lebanon in 2022. So after all these years of absence. In Malawi is one of the poorest countries in the world. Cholera is endemic there. There have been 2 cyclones hitting the country in early 2022. Rain and flooding caused displacement, affected water and sanitation system. Cholera outbreaks. A cholera outbreak affected the southern provinces, which subsequently spread during the rainy season to the whole country and led to a surge in cases globally. And the same, like in North Kivu, which is where Anais and Nana have already been talking about in the DRC. It's an area affected by a lot of poverty, conflict since years and decades, poor access to water and sanitation. Cholera is endemic there. A part of the population has been vaccinated, as Anais has showed. There has been displacement caused by an upsurge in conflict late last year, which then led to a surge in cases that Anais and Nana both showed you on their figures. So with this, I hope that you have seen a pattern a little bit between all these situations. Here I want to show the ingredients or the necessary factors that we need for a cholera outbreak that cause the cholera risk. So of course the bacterium that causes cholera needs to be present. We need to have a vulnerable population, and by vulnerable here I mean it's a usually poor population with lack of access to water and sanitation, and often also lack of access to health care. And the population needs to have low immunity in general, low immunity to cholera. So these factors together cause the cholera risk. And many or all of these other factors that I've mentioned before, they contribute to this vulnerability, or so does conflict and violence and displacement. They they contribute to the lack of access to water and sanitation, they contribute to poverty, they make populations vulnerable. So does economic crisis, weather events that impact the access to water and sanitation, the preparedness that can contribute to the access to care, to lack of access to care. Consequences of COVID can both influence the care-seeking behavior of a population because they don't trust the health system anymore, and can contribute to low immunity because people don't want to get vaccinated against cholera. Of course, vaccine availability will decrease the population immunity, and multiple years without outbreaks will decrease the immunity in the population. Note that there is for sure many more factors to add on this figure, and that many of these factors not only contribute to the risk of starting an outbreak, but also to the risk to maintain an outbreak once it has started. Let me touch one word about climate, weather, and cholera transmission. So you're not supposed to be able to read the figure on the left, but it is to show how complex these interactions between weather and weather events and cholera are. Weather events may increase or decrease cholera transmission, and I'm talking about both of them, seasonal and extreme events that may happen. Climate change will impact the occurrence of seasonal and extreme events, but on the other hand, the attribution of one individual cholera outbreak to climate change alone is not possible so far, or will not be possible. So weather and climate change are neither necessary nor sufficient conditions for cholera outbreaks to occur, but can certainly contribute to them. Yeah. Let me now come to conclusions. So I hope I have been able to show that poverty, lack of access to water and sanitation, lack of access to care are known and very important risk factors for cholera outbreaks. They play a key role also in the current situations that we see around the world. Conflict, displacement, instability, all these factors, they contribute to, they increase the vulnerability of the population. And of course, many such crises happened in the last 2 years and contributed to many of the cholera situations that we see around the world. So to fight cholera effectively, and this is nothing new for most of you, we need to provide access to safe water and sanitation, especially to vulnerable populations. We need to vaccinate those where we cannot provide water and sanitation very quickly in priority. We need to ensure access to care is given, and we need to maintain preparedness even if cholera has been absent for several years, as soon as there is a vulnerable population. Yeah, I hope with all this I've been able to show you a little bit how cholera outbreaks arise and how the current global situation looks, and I hope you all understood that we cannot blame only COVID and climate change, but they may contribute. Thanks a lot.